Barely months after one of the worst managerial spells we've seen in Championship history, Wayne Rooney is back in management in the Championship already. He's been appointed as the new head coach of Plymouth Argyle in a move that, no surprise, has shocked football fans alike. So, is this a good move for Plymouth off the back of what happened only months ago at Birmingham City? And is Wayne Rooney's overall managerial career as bad as what people perceive? Let's discuss all that, run through his managerial career thus far, and judge whether this truly is a good appointment for Plymouth or not. Now, Wayne Rooney's first managerial role come at Derby County when he took over as caretaker in November 2020. His first two games ended in defeat after losing 1-0 and 3-0 to Bristol City and yours truly. However, his Derby side then went on a 7-game unbeaten run, winning 2 and drawing 5. This was a run of really low-scoring games, showing that Rooney hadn't quite cracked how to get his Derby side scoring, but they weren't conceding many at the other end either. They maintained this run with a decent run of form, losing only 5 of their following 13 games. This run did take Rooney's Derby up to 17th in the Championship. However, their season was about to take a drastic turn for the worst. Following that decent start, Derby's Rams side then lost 10 of their final 14 games, winning just 1, scraping survival by only 1 single point on the final day after a dramatic 3-3 home draw against Sheffield Wednesday. Now, this epic collapse was almost the writing on the wall as to what would follow Derby in the following season. They would suffer an initial 12-point deduction, followed by an additional 9 points that season, which, as we all figured, would inevitably relegate Derby down into League One. Yes, he had a relegation on his CV, but his Derby side did accumulate 55 points that season, which, given all the off-the-field issues, the players at his disposal, and all the noise around Derby County's future, was quite impressive. They of course lost 21 due to the points deductions, which led to Derby being relegated by 7 points in the end, but you couldn't really blame Rooney for Derby's relegation. You have to blame all of what had happened at the club prior. Yes, he didn't set the world alight at Derby County. 55 points isn't going to blow your socks off and get you anywhere near even mid-table, but overall, you'd have to say, he did a pretty respectable job. The interesting thing is that he then left. He opted to leave Derby once they were relegated to League One, saying that the club needed fresh energy. Now, of course, it was always going to be a tough first season back in the third tier for Derby County, but even if Wayne Rooney had stayed and showed a degree of loyalty, I think that would have looked better on his CV than him just leaving. Even if he just got Derby into the playoffs, even if he did get them anywhere near potentially automatic promotion, I think him sticking around and showing a bit of a loyalty towards the club and giving at least one season a crack in League One would have looked a lot better to potential suitors in the future than what he did in the end, which was leave and then head to the US, where his following managerial spell wasn't exactly great. He left Derby County after managing them for 84 games, winning 25, drawing 21 and losing 38, coming out of it with around 1.1 points per game. Now, he took charge of DC United in July 2022 when the club were rock bottom of their conference. He won his first game at home to Orlando City, however, that was almost as good as it got, as he only won one more game in that season in his final 13, losing 9 of them, with DC United finishing exactly where he found them, rock bottom of their conference and the entire MLS. However, like with Derby, when Rooney had a full season in charge of DC United, like with Derby, things gotten better without things ever getting great. He did improve DC United's fortunes, but they still failed to get anywhere near the Eastern Conference playoffs. They finished 12th in the end with 40 points, meaning overall he managed 53 games for DC United, winning 14, drawing 13, but losing 26, with his overall points per game as manager of DC United dropping a little bit lower than at Derby, with him only accumulating around 1.04 points per game. So you could say, if you're going to give Rooney any sort of credit, he took over two clubs who weren't in a great position. Derby County had so many off-the-field issues and he was fighting an extreme uphill battle the entire time. But his time at the end of Derby come just before maybe things could have actually gotten quite good for Rooney. And the same happened at DC United. Yep, they didn't get anywhere near the playoffs after his first full season, but he at least took them 13 points better off than the season prior and could have gotten them at least competing for a playoff spot had he stuck around. But he left DC United via mutual consent and headed to the West Midlands to Birmingham City, where it's safe to say his managerial career and reputation truly went down the toilet. Rooney took over at Birmingham City in October 2023. This time, he took over a side who weren't in dire straits, a side who were actually in a fantastic position. Birmingham sacked John Eustace when they were 6th in the Championship, a truly baffling decision. In the seasons prior, Birmingham hadn't finished anywhere above 17th, so this was an outstanding position. Birmingham had rarely been in 4 years, but the new owners wanted a big name. They wanted someone at the top of the club who I guess was a bit more of an attractive, sexy name in football, and they brought in Wayne Rooney. And from the get-go, we all saw as football neutrals that he was already facing an extreme uphill task, but in a different kind of way to what he'd faced before. He didn't have a bad squad, he didn't have to fight points deductions, he didn't have to fight anything off the pitch in terms of keeping Birmingham City up. He somehow had to not only maintain the incredible level of standard and points that John Eustace has accumulated at Birmingham City thus far, he then had to somehow try and not only maintain that, but better it, which would have meant having a Birmingham City side under Rooney scoring points at a playoff rate, at a top 6 rate, possibly even higher. If his time at Birmingham that season was to improve, he'd have to be accumulating a points per game somewhere near the top end of the Championship division. So the chances of Rooney maintaining this and not letting this incredible standard thus far slip was going to be incredibly difficult. But not only did Rooney not maintain the standard set by John Eustace, he pretty much destroyed everything he'd done up until that point. So Rooney took charge of Birmingham for 15 games only. He won 2 and he lost 9. He took Birmingham City from 6th all the way down to 20th, lingering only 6 points above the drop before the owners backtracked on their no fear football gamble on Rooney and ended up giving him the boot. Now, although Wayne Rooney isn't going to be credited with being the man who relegated Birmingham, that unfortunately will go on Gary Rowett's CV, he's certainly going to be credited as the man who set the dominoes in motion for one of the most cataclysmic collapses we've ever seen from a side in Championship history. Now, you could say it's partly the owner's fault for putting Rooney in that position. John Eustace was an unbelievably popular figure at Birmingham. The players would have been loving the football, playing under him up in 6th. The fans would have been in dreamland. They've not been anywhere near mid-table in years, never mind possibly looking and dreaming of a playoff campaign in the Premier League. So for that to be ripped up, for that to be scrapped and thrown in the bin for the sake of a sexy name was an unnecessary gamble that the owners simply did not have to make. But for Rooney, having to go in there and get the fans on side, get the players on side, for them to all understand this baffling decision was going to be a tough task in itself. But then on the pitch, Rooney also had to somehow match the points per game that John Eustace had accumulated up until that point. He then had to somehow even better it, which was going to be such a tough ask. So inevitably the pressure on Rooney to maintain this standard was already going to be difficult enough, and the odds on him looking worse than Eustace and doing a weaker job than Eustace was always going to be quite a high possibility. But for him to send them down as far as he did, you could say the owners put him in a position where he was doomed from the start. But still, the football, the lack of tactical awareness, and some of the stuff we saw under Rooney, the collapse and the tenure that he had at Birmingham City is unforgivable, and one we all thought he would never recover from. So in the end, Wayne Rooney stepped away from a truly shocking and what we thought would be managerial career-destroying spell at Birmingham after managing them for 15 games, winning 2, drawing 4 and losing 9, with a points per game of 0.67. Again, his managerial points per game taking another step downwards from his initial spell at Derby. So Rooney's overall managerial record for Plymouth fans looks like this. He has managed 152 games combined so far as a manager. He's only won 41 of them games. He's drew 38, but he has lost 73 games. That means his points per game overall as a manager just creeps over 1 point per game at 1.06. Now, in your average championship season, that would get Plymouth around 48 points, which unfortunately would relegate Plymouth in 5 of the 10 previous championship campaigns. The conclusion for Rooney as a coach is, he's not a great manager. I think the eye test alone tells you from looking at some of his teams that he is not a fantastic coach. And like the Lampards, like the Gerrards, maybe he gets more opportunities than he really should because of his name as a footballer rather than his name as a manager. However, you could also say, if you want to give him any sort of credit, he took over at Derby, he took over at DC, he even took over at Birmingham in a really, really tough spot where it was always going to be tough for him to make a name for himself. It was always going to be tough for him to follow what had come before and somehow find a way of bettering it. And he will always be remembered for doing what he did at Birmingham, which is the standard of the Championship. It is higher than the MLS. It is a lot higher than where Derby were a couple of seasons ago. So where will he fare at Plymouth? Plymouth are a side who just stayed up this season, and their owners already have quite a little bit of redeeming to do with the fans after the terrible appointment of Ian Foster at the back end of last season, which almost similarly, in a strange parallel to Rooney at Birmingham, threw Plymouth into a relegation battle they should never have been a part of. So it's interesting that they've looked at Rooney as someone who can send them away from this predicament they are in, when in fact Rooney did something very similar, if not worse than what Ian Foster did at Plymouth last season. So all they can hope is that, like at DC, like at Derby, with a full season in front of him, Rooney can deliver something decent. But is he really the man to take Plymouth forwards? I'm not sure. Maybe he can keep them in and around where they are now, but even then, as I say, his points per game as a manager would have got Plymouth relegated in 50% of the last 10 championship campaigns, so it doesn't scream as a safe pair of hands. It doesn't scream as a guy who's going to send them into the next stage of their 5-year plan. And it's a real surprise because Plymouth always strike me as an incredibly well-run club. And I won't lie when I say that this was a shocking appointment that really, really surprised me. Now, I hope for Plymouth I'm proved wrong. As I've said in many videos, I have a real soft spot for Plymouth and I really hope they do well. But I am more concerned by this appointment than I am optimistic. Maybe the type of club, the lower expectations, it might serve in Rooney's favour. But it's safe to say he's quite lucky to be given an opportunity after what happened at Birmingham. And if this goes disastrously wrong, you'd have to say his career at Plymouth and his career at the Championship level of English football has definitely got to be over. So we'll see how things go down in Devon for Plymouth and for Wayne Rooney. Hopefully this could be a perfect marriage where he finally finds a club that suits him and maybe he is the right fit for Plymouth as a club too. But if it all goes wrong, I don't think there'll be many people that surprised and that many people who'll be telling Plymouth that this was a disastrous appointment. And again, a bit like the Ian Foster appointment, Plymouth have gotten this one wrong once again. Hopefully it won't come back to bite them, and hopefully it won't lead to them suffering another nerve-rattling relegation battle next season. Time will only tell. But I want to hear from you Plymouth fans in the comment section below. Is this an appointment you're excited by? I feel from what I've seen, the reaction, it instantly gets that short-term injection of excitement because, again, it's a big name. But as we've seen with Rooney and many other big names, a big-name player does not mean a big-name manager. And off of his managerial career so far, if I was a Plymouth fan, this would not be the appointment for me. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section. I'll be very intrigued to hear them. And as always, if you've enjoyed this video, hit the like button on this video and subscribe for much more football content to come. But until next time, guys, do take care. A big thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.